Hello and welcome to the 16 Days of Activism video podcast series in support of UN Women UK and Safe Spaces Now.
Public spaces need to be safe and inclusive for all, now. A report by UN Women UK reveals how common sexual harassment is in the UK. 97% of women my age said they had experienced harassment. Your ideas to support us have already started making a change. At music festivals, with taxi companies, on public transport, in organisations and in online spaces. It's time for a change. Please support Safe Spaces Now by donating to the cause or get involved. You can find the link next to this video. Thank you.
My name is Elfverson. I'm the founder of EyeStorm Women UK and also the Speak Up Woman platform where women get training in public speaking. This video podcast series we're doing covers some pretty dark topics, from nightlife violence to trafficking, domestic abuse and much more. We're doing this campaign because the statistics of violence against women and girls here in the UK, they are still brutal and we need to see change. So we want to bring these topics forward, open up the conversation about it and discuss them with some people with insights and potentially put some suggestions and solutions in front of the right people. So if you can help us connect with the right people, please pass this video on. Today's topic is violence against sex workers. And with me on this call, I have Maya Oppenheim, who is working for The Independent as the only women's correspondent in the UK, and also Niki Adams, who's the spokesperson for the English collective of Prostitutes. Thank you so much for joining me today. First of all, I just wanted to point out for the viewers as well that this conversation is only highlighting the violence against sex workers. We're not going to go into debate about anything else. So first out, Niki Adams, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit more about you and what you do.
Hello, my name is Niki Adams. I'm a spokeswoman for the English collective of Prostitutes, which is a sex workers collective that's been going since 1975. We are campaigning for decriminalisation, for safety, for sex workers' rights and for resources so that sex workers can leave prostitution when they want. And we have a national network and an international network with sister organisations in Thailand and the US. And I suppose in terms of our relation to this topic of violence against women and girls, sex workers experience an enormous amount of violence, and that violence is exacerbated by the criminalisation of sex work, which prevents us working together with others and forces us to work in isolation. So we're often in a position where we're having to balance between risking arrest by working together or risking violence by working on our own, which is the only legal way for us to work.
Thank you so much for that. This area of violence against sex work, what's happening around there? Is there incentives to change anything, or how can we make it a better situation?
Yeah, that's a very important question, because there's actually a massive push from a groundswell of grassroots sex worker-led organisations and movement generally to improve safety. And it's the main motivation behind the campaign for decriminalisation, because what the prostitution laws do is that they force sex workers to work in isolation. Most sex workers are women. Many, the majority of those are mothers working to support families. There's been a big increase in prostitution in recent years because of the cost of living crisis, and before that, the austerity cuts, and generally the kind of economic crisis in which we're living in the UK. So there's been a big increase in prostitution, and with that comes a lot of violence. And there's a big push to deal with the prostitution laws, because what they do is that they ban sex workers from working on the street. You can be done for soliciting, loitering and soliciting. And what that means in practice is that you're constantly running from the police. You don't feel able to approach the police for protection because you're always fearful of arrest. And for those of us who are migrant, we're fearful of deportation. And then if you're working together with another woman in premises, which is obviously preferable, you feel much safer if you're working with someone else, that's actually illegal as well under the brothel keeping laws. And the penalty for brothel keeping is very, very draconian. It's up to 7 years in prison. So what happens in practice is that sex workers are the main motivating force to try and keep ourselves safe. We're the ones that are trying to find ways to work in safer ways, work in areas where there's CCTV, or whether we're working in premises, employing various kind of measures like a security gate or even having somebody screen calls. But everything we do to try and keep safe is actually puts us at greater risk of arrest. So there's a big move for change, but what we're up against is the politicians and some other people in authority who are resisting that. And it's a battle that's going on at the moment, and public opinion is definitely on our side, but we're really up against the politicians.
Thank you so much. I'm going to bring in Maya. Hi, do you want to introduce yourself first, Maya?
Hi, I work as a journalist. I work as the Independent's women's correspondent. I'm the only women's correspondent at a UK news outlet. I write about sex work, abortion, policing, sexual violence, domestic abuse, poverty, human rights. Yeah, all manner of things. I've just published this book, The Pocket Guide to the Patriarchy. It's got a chapter on sex work.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. And this, I just need to say that this book, the topics here are pretty much in line with all the topics in this 16 Days of Activism campaign. And you've got sex work is chapter 14 in your book. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so sex work felt like an important chapter to include in the book, in the sense that it is historically one of the most, if not the most, divisive issue within feminism. And, you know, it's something that, yeah, views on it are very, very polarized. I won't go down too much of a rabbit hole into that because, you know, we're here to talk about violence against women and girls and people of marginalized genders. But yeah, I guess sex work is a dangerous job, and, you know, sexual violence is rife within it. I guess a big issue, which Niki has touched on, is that a lot of sex workers, you know, they don't want to go to the police for support. They fear, you know, arrest. They fear deportation. So yeah, they see the police as a threat, you know, they say, rather than as a kind of arm of the state that would, you know, safeguard or protect them. And, you know, I remember one sex worker said in a quote I included in the story, you know, I could be on the floor, you know, about to die and not call the police. I mean, that's a very stark, extreme example. But yeah, the police very much are not seen as, as a protection mechanism.
Maya's book was really useful in that I mean, it's a fantastic book generally. I mean, it's the kind of book that you want to give to your relatives and friends, and, you know, Christmas presents is what I have in mind, obviously, because it's the thing that's brilliant about it is that it's packed full of facts, as we know, but it's also got sections in every area which really focuses on some of the victories and achievements that have been made. And for us, that's been really important, because the movement against violence against women and girls, sex workers have always been an integral and central part of that, but we've rarely been acknowledged. So, for example, we fought a private prosecution to put a serial rapist behind bars, and once we actually had to privately prosecute that case because the Crown Prosecution Service and the police did not want to take action against him. And once we got a conviction, we found out, of course, that he had a previous record of many other offences. And if those two women, two sex workers who bravely came forward to make sure that that man was prosecuted and imprisoned, if they hadn't done that, facing all kinds of stigma and discrimination and hate in the course of doing it, that man would still be free and still able to attack women. And so we have been really central as sex workers to a groundswell of fury about the level of violence against women, but we haven't been acknowledged as that. And in some ways, we've been in some sectors, we've been blamed for it. It's a bit like, I mean, the police tell us often, you know, if you're out there on the street and you do get attacked, the police will say, well, it's your own fault. If you don't want to face violence, go home, kind of thing. Completely, I mean, scandalously, because that's, you know, their first responsibility should be to protect people, but also ignoring the fact that the vast majority of sex workers are out there to earn a living because the other jobs available to women, or the, you know, because of benefit sanctions and because of poverty generally, often you have very few choices. Prostitution, if anything, is the best choice of a set of very bad choices. So, you know, we really have been up against it. And I felt like Maya's book, for the first time, gave us that kind of acknowledgement that we deserve.
Thank you. I also think that, yeah, it feels like among those feminists and politicians and members of the public who are very much in favour of the Nordic model. Now, for those who don't understand what the Nordic model is, you know, to some people it sounds quite appealing. If you don't know much about this kind of world, because
tell us what it is, Maya.
So it's criminalizing the purchase of sex, and then claiming to, you know, not to criminalize those who sell sex. But in reality, you know, research has found that actually it drives up violence against sex workers because it pushes it further and further underground. There's a brilliant app called Ugly Mugs, and it's a way that sex workers can literally, you know, do what it says on the tin, share photos of violent or predatory, dangerous punters. You know, apps like that, you know, they don't use those often in places with the Nordic model because you can't, because it's so pushed so far underground. But I guess, yeah, something that I touch on this book, and something that just kind of plagues me generally as a question, is why with those feminists, I'll focus on the feminists because that's where it feels the most hypocritical and troubling and distressing and also kind of confusing, is, you know, why do you believe in women being able to have choice about, you know, their bodily autonomy in the sense of being able to choose to continue with a pregnancy or to have an abortion, yet you're so anti-sex work and you can't even, like, yeah, and you're not trying. I guess there's three reasons, aren't there, in a way, that people do sex work. You could either be pushed into it, you know, due to poverty, which is what Niki has just said, and that's a major issue. Many sex workers in this country are public sector workers. They're nurses, they're teachers, you know, they're mothers, they're people doing that alongside other jobs, often, you know, alongside charity, voluntary sector work. And yeah, or you could be coerced and forced into it by a pimp or a trafficker, or you could, you know, have a personal desire and inclination to want to do sex work. But I guess it's, you know, for some people, they would disregard that third option, and, you know, they think that it could only happen via poverty or via coercion. But I guess, yeah, why are people so keen to control, you know, what women do with their bodies?
Yeah, I think that's really good. That's really true. I think the other thing is, though, is even if you are pushed into it by poverty or coerced by somebody into sex work or traffic, for example, criminalizing us as sex workers and criminalizing clients doesn't help us. I mean, it always makes it much harder. The biggest thing you need if you're being coerced or if you're a victim of violence is to be able to escape and to get help from the authorities. And both those things, you are really massively deterred from doing it because of criminalization. I mean, you know, women in our group, you know, are frequently being raided by the police because they're working together with other people in premises. And when they experience violence, they're frightened to, women will tell us, look, I'm not going to go to the police, as Maya said, because I know what will happen is that they will start to scrutinize me. I will be at risk of being prosecuted for brothel keeping, and or they'll just close the whole place down and I'll be left in a worse situation. I've never known any woman who's been working in a flat which has been closed down that has ended up in a better working conditions. It's always worse. It means that the management is more oppressive. They take a bigger cut of your earnings. They're less likely to be screening clients. So going for closing down the premises doesn't help sex workers, in the same way as arresting clients for curb crawling on the street doesn't help women working on the street. All it means is that those men are really nervous and worried about arrest, and they're not going to want to be in the areas that are better lit with CCTV, which is where sex workers would prefer to work. And so, for example, in Newham, when they had a crackdown in Newham and Romford, women were pushed out into an area called Wanstead Flats, which is like a wooded area. And of course, violent attacks went up. And it's not disconnected. Violent men know that if they attack sex workers, there's a good chance they'll get away with it. And that at the very least, the women won't be able to report. And that's really at the root of why sex work is so dangerous.
I want to ask you, we have a couple of things we need to mention. We are going to give directions to both getting help and find out more information about this, and also how to reach the two of you if people want. But we've talked about the police and we talk about the legality and the women, but something you haven't mentioned that much is the perpetrator, and you saying that they're attacking the women. Is this something that is, planned, or is it things going wrong? What's going on here?
Well, for me, yeah, you go ahead, Maya.
So you're asking, I mean, I can't put myself into the shoes of, a dangerous punter's head. So I've got no idea if it's premeditated or not. But I guess from sex workers I've spoken to, most of them do seem to have a story of a violent incident. But it's worth bearing in mind, sexual violence is rife in all walks of life. So, it's not just sex work. But there was some research done a long time ago which showed that sex workers were far more likely to be murdered than other workers. But given so many sex workers don't want to do research, and it's really hard to do polling, it's really hard to get, a solid picture of stuff. But I think, so you're asking, I think that, perpetrators, dangerous men they will just monopolize and exploit the fact that these women are terrified of the police. So it's just like, it's a shadowy underground world by nature of the fact that, the law on prostitution in this country is just so, technically it isn't illegal to buy and sell sex, but all of the things that you do to keep safe or just to kind of maintain your business are illegal. So I think that they really exploit that, and they know that these are vulnerable people that they can really exploit.
The only thing, I can't put my mind into the shoes that, my head into the shoes of a violent rapist either, but you do know from how they behave some of what's going on. And so, for example, one of my friends working with a friend, the client was really started pushing women around, and when women told him to get out and leave, he just turned around and said, well, I know you're working illegally. I know you can't do anything about this. So the best that they could do is make all their effort to get him out of the place, but they weren't going to go to the police because they knew that they would get arrested themselves or closed down. And that's true of women working on the street as well. It's like the laws give a green light to violent rapists. And that's true in terms of what Maya said as well about the criminalization of clients, because coupled with the criminalization of clients is this judgmental attitude towards sex workers, which is that we don't know our own mind, that we're victims. That brings forward a whole set of other set of discrimination. You can't get housing, you can't work in hotels, you're threatened with losing custody of your children. That happens here too, but it's much, much worse in those Nordic countries and the other countries which have introduced the Nordic model. But there is a turn, there's something else happening, which is that, first of all, New Zealand decriminalized 20 years ago now, in 2003, and all the evidence, which is often ignored, but all the evidence shows that it's safer, healthier, that there's better trust with the police, that prostitution hasn't increased, that trafficking hasn't increased. So there's a really good body of evidence to show that safety has been improved by decriminalization. And there are moves in other places. Parts of Australia have decriminalised. Belgium is the first European country to decriminalise, and they've already seen significant changes in terms of the relationship between sex workers and the police as well. So that is a counter to these various countries which have introduced the Nordic model, or the criminalisation of clients, where again there is also a body of evidence, as Maya made reference to, which has shown that violence against sex workers has increased in places where they've increased criminalisation. Do you mind if I just say one last thing, which is that I find it personally scandalous that women who call themselves feminists would be calling for the criminalisation of clients, which is basically the increased criminalisation of sex work and an increase in police powers that will first and foremost be used against sex workers, considering the outpouring that has just come out about the sexism, misogyny, racism, transphobia, homophobia of the police. It's kind of irrefutable evidence. So how can you justify, under those circumstances, calling for increased police powers against a criminalised and therefore vulnerable population of sex workers?
There's a lot of work to be done, and this is exactly why we're doing these podcasts as well. And we want this to be a topic because it's so important to put it forward. So a woman who is a sex worker, if she doesn't want to go to the police, what happens if she's injured? What do they do?
Well, she often comes to us. I mean, a lot of the work that we do as a sex worker organisation is helping women who have been victims of violence. But some of the times, I mean, National Ugly Mugs is also being helpful. But what we've found recently that we've come up against is that there is absolutely no reporting mechanism that is suitable for sex workers. I mean, we've tried and tried. We've tried to find, police forces or police officers that will actually take reports from sex workers in a sensitive way. And every single time we're pushed back and told they just have to go and report to their local police station or through the normal reporting mechanisms, which is completely inappropriate for sex workers, because most of the time, the biggest fear as well is that your name will become public as a sex worker. You will be branded as a sex worker. And especially if you're a mother, you're not going to do that. You're not going to risk that by reporting violence. And there is an implication, because every time a woman is unable to report, a violent man gets away with it. And we know that men, when they get away with it, they're more likely to attack again. So it's really a public safety issue, the fact that sex workers can't report the violence that they're experiencing.
A big issue, I think, is that, you've touched on this, but I just thought I'd expand, is just how stigmatized sex work is, and how people just they don't know much about the industry due to its its illegality. And then I think a lot of it is to do with misogyny and slut shaming. And that will affect, male sex workers and sex workers of marginalized genders too. And just almost, I think people see sex workers as deviant, sexual deviants, and it's just an extension and a more extreme version of slut shaming, this very biologically deterministic view that is totally, spurious and has no base to it, totally baseless, which is that, men are predispositioned to have far higher sex drives and higher libidos than women, and that women must be more chaste, and that we should be very wary of promiscuous women. Or even Andrew Tate, didn't he say the other day, a woman, he doesn't want to be with any woman who's had sex with more than 3 people, and that it's disgusting for women to have multiple sexual partners, and it's fine for men to do the same. So I would see that as linked to the stigmatization of sex work, and even some of the women that are very, very scathing and prejudiced against sex workers, that would be them being misogynistic. Women can be misogynistic too, and it just strikes me as very judgmental. You know, why are you so interested? As long as someone is making a free choice about what they want to do with their body, they're not being exploited, and, you know, something isn't making them feel really, you know, awful, then, you know, let people do what they want. I think it's just much wider misogyny, that kind of slut shaming attitude, which I think is far more rife than people like to admit to, and that big pockets of the country think like that. And it's like, they might be very pro gender equality when it comes to more women in boardrooms, but, you know, do you take an egalitarian approach to, you know, sexual pleasure and, you know, sexual partners? Fair enough. If you want to take a more conservative view towards your sex life, totally fine, you know, but I just think it's not good to have one view for men and a different one for women, and I think that ties into stigmatization of sex workers.
Is there anything we can do to bring this forward to someone specific, Niki, that you would like to do more about it or see this?
Yes, well, in fact, in 2016, there was a Home Affairs Select Committee inquiry into prostitution. And as a result of that inquiry, they recommended that sex workers working on the street and together in premises be decriminalised, and that criminal records be expunged. And that's quite important, because once you have a criminal record for sex work, it kind of sets the direction of your life. You know, it's very difficult to then leave prostitution, because you're barred from many other jobs. It affects your relationships with family and friends. It affects whether you can report violence. Many different aspects of your life are really devastated by a criminal record. And that report was very good and could be implemented immediately. I'd like to just say that one of the problems we have is the misinformation about trafficking and modern slavery. And I just to very briefly mention that, because in our experience, the anti-trafficking policy and laws and the modern slavery policy and laws have primarily been used to arrest and raid and convict migrant sex workers for prostitution. And that is a condemnation of those laws and of the people that pushed for them, that they haven't examined whether the laws are actually being used to protect sex workers or people that are suffering exploitation and violence, or whether they're actually being used against a particularly vulnerable sector of sex workers. And the problem with it is that the police get funding for anti-trafficking, and how they prove the results of that funding is by raiding sex workers' premises, and they particularly target migrant and trans migrant sex workers. So in the last couple of years, I would say that 90% of the sex workers that have come to us having been raided and facing criminal charges are migrant women. So you can see that racism is really compounding the kind of discrimination that sex workers face. But what we really fundamentally need is we need organizations, including feminist organizations, to come out in support of our demand for decriminalization and safety. That is happening to a certain extent across the country, but much more needs to be done. And the feminists in government or in the opposition, the women who call themselves feminist in the government or in the opposition, who are pressing for the increased criminalization of sex work and are ignoring the voices of sex workers, need to be addressed. People need to say, look, that's not acceptable. That is not the feminism that we believe in. We think that the people most directly impacted by laws, who have an experience of violence, should be at the forefront of saying what needs to happen to it. And current sex workers want decriminalisation in the UK and worldwide. And that really has to be the demand of the feminist movement.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Niki. Were you going to ask me the same thing? Sorry.
Carry on if you wanted to comment on that.
Oh, no. What were you going to say? I don't want to interject.
No, I just wanted to mention as well that I think for a lot of people, this is a very niche topic, obviously, and they think it's all very underground and very hidden. And we've talked before this recording about, you know, how many sex workers there are in the UK, how prevalent it is, how many British men have paid for sex. And we don't even want to go into the numbers, because it's, of course, very difficult to know. But do you just want to say something general on that? How prevalent it is, Maya, while we have you.
Okay, so how prevalent is sex work? Well, like I said previously, it's really hard to know the exact numbers because of the underground criminalized nature of the work. You know, sex workers are so scared that they're too scared to talk to university academics, you know, because they've been so stigmatized and so criminalized, and they're constantly, you know, in fear of facing arrest. But yeah, so it is hard to get, you know, the solid figures on that. And the lots of research that's been done is like really old. But like I said before, there's lots of public sector workers doing sex work, you know, and I've interviewed quite a few people who work in the voluntary sector, and they, you know, paid voluntary sector roles, and they do sex work to supplement that. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions about, you know, who sex workers are. And there's, you know, probably a lot of people out there, they do know sex workers, they've got maybe not close friends, but even I've had close friends who've done sex work, and then I haven't known until, you know, they've told me, like when they finally, well, they probably read my articles actually, said, actually, we can see that, you know, you're on our side. But yeah, I think a lot more people out there do sex work than people would like to, you know, that people are aware of. I think it is something that still remains quite taboo, in the same way that sex in and of itself is still quite taboo in British culture. You know, often people, you know, unless you're in, I put this in the book, so I don't want to feel like I'm repeating myself, but, you know, unless you're, you know, watching porn, or you're at a sex positive panel event, or you're reading a women's mag, you know, discussions of sex are quite, you know, few and far between. In some social circles, you know, sex doesn't come up at like birthday parties and, you know, in public kind of spaces. So then the idea that people, you know, are exchanging money for sex, I think it's something that, you know, it does seem to provoke very visceral, very aggressively judgmental responses from people. Like, it's one of those things that people have an opinion on. They might not have an opinion on, like, you know, David Cameron or other like more kind of like mainstream political discourse, but yeah, you know, they are horrified and disgusted by people doing sex work, and it just really kind of upsets them somewhere deep inside them, and I don't know if they'd even be able to explain why. But just to end on a positive note, is I did a talk in Hampstead Heath. It was in September, and it was about sex work. And in the audience, so this is called How the Light Gets In Festival. They're the world's biggest music and philosophy festival. And yeah, everybody in that audience, and I'm not great at, you know, looking at crowds of people and predicting the numbers, but there must have been, you know, there were dozens and dozens of people in there. And at the beginning of the talk, I said, you know, who's in favor of decriminalizing sex work? And everybody in there was in favor of it, apart from one German woman who wasn't totally sure, but everyone else was in favor. So I mean, yeah, that's not, you know, a nationally representative demographic or sample of, you know, British society. But I do think that, yeah, a lot of people, I think if they were to fully understand and educate themselves on how this industry works, and, you know, how women are living with massive fear of arrest hanging over them, or actually being criminalized themselves and then trapped in the industry, unable to leave because of their criminal record, I think a lot of people would be in favor of decriminalization. And yeah, that's what we need. There's, you know, the solution, that is the solution.
Do you have anything to add to that, Niki, at all?
No, only that it reminds me of the other really wonderful thing about Maya's book, which is that it did feel that for the first time, in some ways, you know, a prominent feminist like Maya is actually on our side. And that's very encouraging and heartwarming in itself, but it's also a sign of how things are improving, and, you know, that change is really coming, that the public is on our side. We just have to deal with the politicians.
How can people reach you, Niki, if they want to find out more or get in touch?
So we are the English collective of prostitutes, and our website is prostitutescollective.net. And you can always get in touch with us through email, ecp@prostitutescollective.net, or calling us. We're based at the Crossroads Women's Centre in Kentish Town with about 14 other women's organisations, including Women Against Rape, who we work very closely with, and a number of other organisations. and we always welcome visitors, and we welcome people to get in touch.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, Maya, feel free to do a shameless intro of your book here, and
okay,
we can find it.
Yeah, I'll do some shameless self-promo, but just quickly, yeah, Niki does so much amazing work in this area, you know, like you've been working hard at it for, you know, decades, not just on sex worker rights, on all sorts of different things. That centre is just like a hub of activity. It's amazing. It's a really, yeah, I would recommend it somewhere to go to help. And also just if you want to restore your faith in humanity, because they're all just like, yeah, pretty incredible individuals there. And yeah, so my book is here. It's available on Amazon. I know a lot of people don't like Amazon for the obvious reasons. So yeah, you can also get it on Waterstones, yeah, Foils, Blackwell's, a lot of the indie book publishers. If it's not in your local bookshop, ask them to order it. But yeah, and you can contact me via Maya Ruth Oppenheim at gmail.com, or if it's something to do related more to my work at the Independent, Maya.Oppenheim at independent.co.uk. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. So yeah, just drop me a message if you've got any ideas for a story or you just want to chat.
Fantastic. You've also got a newsletter, haven't you, going out? Can you tell us
Oh,
how?
yeah, that goes out every Thursday. It's free. It goes out at 8 a.m. on a Thursday. You can sign up through the Independent. If you just type in the Independent and newsletters and you click women, independent women.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for joining this conversation on a very heavy topic, but I think it had uplifting moments as well. So thank you for bringing those forward, and we will close the call there and wish you good luck with your upcoming works and your work, Niki, as well, to create change. Thank you so much. And we will hopefully see the viewers in our next video in the 16 Days of Activism. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Don't forget to donate to Safe Spaces now, link next to the video.